My name is Avery Callahan, and I was 25 years old the day I learned my parents were preparing to sacrifice my little sister to save their reputation. The worst part? They called it love. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my apartment in Richmond, reviewing contracts for a property management company, when my phone started vibrating across my desk. The screen showed Mom. I almost ignored it. My mother rarely called during business hours. When she did, it usually meant somebody in the family wanted something. I answered anyway. The second I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. "Avery, I need you to come home this weekend." No greeting, no small talk, just an order. I leaned back in my chair. "What happened?" A pause. Then, "It's your sister." My stomach tightened. Emma, 19 years old, college sophomore, future veterinarian, the sweetest person I had ever known. "What about Emma?" Another pause, the kind people use when they're deciding how much truth to tell. "There's been an incident." I hated that word immediately. People never use the word incident when they're talking about something innocent. "What kind of incident?" My mother sighed. "The town is talking." And suddenly I understood, not because she explained, because I grew up in Willow Creek, a town where gossip spread faster than wildfires, a place where people collected rumors the way children collected baseball cards. The truth never mattered there, only the story. "What are they saying?" "It doesn't matter." That answer made me sit upright, because whenever somebody says the truth doesn't matter, it means the truth is on your side. "They think Emma was seen with a boy." I blinked. "That's it?" "It isn't that simple." "It sounds exactly that simple." My mother's voice hardened. "You don't understand how these things look." There it was, look, appearance, reputation, image, the holy trinity of my parents' lives. I rubbed my forehead. "Mom, Emma is 19. "I know how old she is." "Then why are you acting like she committed a crime?" Silence. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "We're handling it. Not, we're helping her. Not, we're supporting her. Not, we're talking to her. We're handling it." Like Emma was a problem. Like she was damage control. "What does that mean?" Another pause, longer this time. Finally, "You'll understand when you get here." Then she hung up, just like that. I stared at the phone for several seconds. A feeling I hadn't experienced in years settled into my chest. Fear. Not for Emma, for what my parents might do. Because I'd spent 25 years watching them choose appearances over people, and every single time, people lost. The drive home took 4 hours. 4 hours of memories I didn't want. 4 hours of remembering exactly why I'd moved away. Willow Creek looked beautiful from a distance. Tree-lined streets, historic buildings, perfect little downtown, the kind of town featured on postcards. But beautiful places can hide ugly ideas, and Willow Creek had one ugly idea buried deeper than all the others. Family reputation mattered more than individual happiness. I learned that lesson when I was 16, the day I told my parents I wanted to leave town for college. My mother cried. My father called me selfish. Not because they would miss me, because people would talk. People always talked, and my parents always listened. As I crossed the city limits, I noticed something strange. People stared. Not openly, just enough. A glance, a whisper, a quick turn of the head. The gossip had already spread. Whatever story existed, the entire town knew it. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, I was angry. By the time I opened the front door, I was terrified. Because Emma wasn't downstairs, she wasn't in the kitchen, she wasn't in the living room. The house felt wrong, quiet, heavy. My mother appeared from the dining room, smiling, and somehow that smile scared me more than panic would have. "Avery," Where's Emma? Upstairs. Why? She's resting. I started toward the stairs. My father stepped into the hallway, blocking me, not aggressively, just enough, the same way he'd blocked doors my entire childhood. Avery. I looked from him to my mother, then back again, and I knew. Whatever was happening, they didn't want me talking to Emma first. They wanted to tell the story, control the narrative, shape the facts, the way they always did. What happened? My father exchanged a glance with my mother. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. We've arranged a marriage. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd heard him wrong. A what? A marriage. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. To who? A respectable young man. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. None came. My mother folded her hands. This will solve the problem. And that's when I realized they weren't joking. They had already decided. My 19-year-old sister's future had been negotiated, and nobody had bothered asking her what she wanted. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. I just stood there staring at my parents, waiting for one of them to laugh, waiting for someone to admit this was a misunderstanding. It never happened. My father pulled out a chair and sat down as calmly as if we were discussing the weather. My mother adjusted a vase in the center of the dining table. Neither of them seemed remotely disturbed by what they had just told me. Meanwhile, I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. You arranged a marriage? I repeated. My father nodded. His name is Nathan Holloway. The name meant nothing to me. My mother immediately added, his family owns Holloway Farms. As if that explained everything, as if property somehow made this normal. I looked back and forth between them. Emma is 19. Exactly. My mother's answer came too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. She's at the perfect age to start a family. I almost laughed again, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. She wants to be a veterinarian. My mother's expression tightened. Dreams change. No, I said. They don't. People force them to. My father rubbed his forehead. We're not having this argument. The fact that he called it an argument instead of a conversation told me everything. The decision had already been made, at least in their minds. I pushed past him. I'm talking to Emma. This time, neither of them stopped me. Maybe they thought she'd already accepted it. Maybe they thought she was too scared to tell me the truth. Either way, they were wrong. Emma's bedroom door was closed. I knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I heard a small voice. Come in. The room looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college. The same pale blue walls, the same bookshelf, the same photographs, the same handmade quilt our grandmother had sewn years ago. But Emma looked different, smaller somehow. She was sitting on the edge of her bed staring at the floor. A diamond ring rested on her finger. My stomach dropped. They had already given her the ring. Before asking her, before consulting her, before considering her future. The sight of it made me sick. Emma looked up. The second she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. That was all I needed to know. People who are excited about getting married don't look relieved when their sister walks into the room. I crossed the room and sat beside her. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Do you want this? Emma immediately looked away, and that silence was louder than any answer. I asked again. Emma. Her shoulders started shaking. I don't know. That wasn't an answer, it was fear. I reached for her hand. Yes or no? Tears rolled down her cheeks, and finally, she whispered. No. One word, barely audible, but it hit me like a punch, because I already knew what came next. The same thing that always comes next when somebody says no in our family. Nobody listens. I waited until she calmed down. Then I asked the question nobody else seemed interested in asking. What actually happened? Emma wiped her eyes, and for the first time, I heard the truth. A month earlier, one of her classmates had gotten stranded after a late study session. Her car broke down 20 miles outside town. No rides, no family nearby, no way home. Emma picked her up. Simple, normal, human. The problem? The classmate happened to be a boy. A boy named Ryan, a boy she'd known for nearly 2 years. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate, nothing secret, just a friend. The problem wasn't what happened. The problem was who saw it. An elderly woman from church spotted Ryan getting into Emma's car outside a diner. That was it. That was the entire story. The whole scandal. One car ride, one witness, one rumor. By the end of the week, people were claiming Emma had been secretly dating him. By the following Sunday, they were saying she'd spent nights with him. By the following Wednesday, she was apparently pregnant. The story grew every time it changed hands, like all lies do. I sat there stunned, because the truth was somehow even smaller than I'd imagined. A girl helped a friend. That was it. Nothing more. And my parents had decided the solution was marriage. Did you tell them what really happened? I asked. Emma nodded, over and over. And? A sad smile crossed her face. They said it doesn't matter. The exact words. The exact same words. My chest tightened, because suddenly I understood. This was never about Emma. This was about my parents, about their image, their standing in town, their reputation, their church friends, their business connections. Emma was simply paying the bill. Then she told me something that made everything worse. The engagement wasn't my parents' idea alone. Nathan's family had approached them, specifically Nathan's mother, Margaret Holloway, a woman famous for controlling everything around her. According to Emma, Margaret had arrived at our house 3 weeks earlier with cookies and sympathy. She told my parents she hated hearing people gossip. She told them she wanted to help. Then she offered a solution. Nathan, a respectable local businessman, 28 years old, financially secure, church-going, responsible, perfect on paper. My parents accepted the offer almost immediately, and the more Emma talked, the less it sounded like concern, and the more it sounded like a business deal. Then she told me the part nobody had mentioned downstairs. Nathan wasn't interested in Emma. Not really. He barely spoke to her. Most conversations happened through their parents. Most decisions happened without them present. The entire relationship felt arranged, because it was. And then Emma said something that froze me. Nathan told me something last week. What? She hesitated, then answered. He said this marriage would be good for both families. Not good for us. Not good for our future. Not because he loved her. For both families. The language of contracts. The language of transactions. The language of people exchanging assets. Not building a life. And suddenly every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Because I work with contracts every day. And whenever somebody talks like that, there's usually something hidden underneath, something nobody wants examined too closely. I looked at Emma. Is there anything else you're not telling me? She hesitated, then nodded. There is. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. The Holloways want Dad's land. I felt my stomach drop. What land? The river property. Now everything made sense. The river property was worth millions. My grandfather had purchased it decades ago. Developers had been trying to buy it for years. My father always refused. Until now. Suddenly the marriage proposal looked very different. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about gossip. It wasn't even about reputation. There was money involved. A lot of money. And the more I thought about it, The more I realized my little sister wasn't being treated like a daughter. She was being treated like the final signature on a deal. And I was about to find out just how much that deal was really worth. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma sitting on her bed, wearing an engagement ring she never wanted. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction, and my sister was the price. The next morning, I tried talking to my father again. "How much is the river property worth?" I asked. His expression changed immediately. That was answer enough. "Avery, you don't understand how these things work." I was tired of hearing that. "Then explain it." He sighed. "The Holloways have investors. And they're interested in development." The conversation ended there. Every answer was vague, every explanation incomplete, which only made me more suspicious. Later that day, I stopped by the town diner. Within 20 minutes, I learned more than my parents had told me all week. The Holloways weren't as successful as they appeared. They had taken on major debt over the past few years. Several business projects had failed. Investors were getting impatient, and the river property my father owned connected directly to land they already controlled. If they acquired it, developers could move forward with a project worth millions. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The rushed engagement, the pressure, the sudden interest in Emma. This wasn't about protecting her. It was about protecting them. The real proof came the following afternoon. I was helping my mother organize decorations when she stepped out to take a phone call. Her purse sat open on the counter. Inside was a packet of documents. Normally I would have ignored it. This time I didn't. I quickly looked through the papers. What I found made my stomach drop. A land transfer proposal, development paperwork, financial projections, and multiple references to both families. The wedding and the land deal were connected, not emotionally, legally, financially, on paper. I snapped a few photos with my phone and returned everything exactly where I'd found it. 30 seconds later, my mother came back. She never knew, but now I did. That evening, Emma and I sat on the back porch. For a while, we watched the sunset in silence. Then she quietly asked, "What if I just do it?" I turned toward her. "What?" "What if I marry him?" The fear in her voice broke my heart. "It would make everything easier." "No." "Mom and Dad would stop fighting." "No." "The town would stop talking." "No." She looked at me, confused. So I finally told her something nobody else had. "You are not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems." The tears came immediately, because deep down, she'd spent her whole life believing she was. 2 days later, things became even clearer. I overheard a conversation between my father and Margaret Holloway. The office door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, but one sentence stopped me cold. "The property transfers after the wedding." I froze, then heard Margaret say, "The investors want guarantees." My father answered, "They'll have them." That was all I needed. The marriage and the land deal were tied together, exactly as I'd suspected, exactly as they had denied. That night, I sat alone in my room, reviewing everything: the documents, the photos, the conversations, the timelines. The truth was obvious now. Emma wasn't being protected. She was being used. The only question left was how to stop it. Then I remembered the engagement luncheon, a room full of witnesses, both families, church leaders, business owners, everyone whose opinion mattered. And suddenly I knew, this wasn't going to end in a private argument. It was going to end in public, right in front of everyone, where the truth could no longer be hidden, and where one simple question would bring the entire arrangement crashing down. The engagement dinner was held at the Holloway's house on Friday night. The place was packed. Church leaders, business owners, family friends, nearly everyone my parents wanted to impress. From the outside, it looked like a celebration. But sitting there, watching Emma force smiles she didn't mean, I knew it was something else entirely. It was a performance, and everyone had been assigned a role, especially my sister. For most of the evening, Nathan barely spoke to Emma. He spent more time talking business with guests than talking to his future wife. That alone told me plenty. Later, he finally sat beside me. For the first few minutes, the conversation stayed polite. Then he relaxed, the way people do when they think they've already won. That's when the truth started slipping out. "This whole thing solves a lot of problems," he said casually. I looked at him. "What problems?" He shrugged. "The rumors, the families, the future." The way he said it made my stomach turn. Not once did he mention Emma. Not once did he mention love. Not once did he mention wanting to spend his life with her. To him, she wasn't the reason for the marriage. She was part of the solution. I decided to ask directly, "What do you like about Emma?" Nathan paused, long enough to make the answer obvious. Finally, he said, "She's sweet." That was it. One word. No story, no memory, nothing personal. Just sweet. The answer of a man describing a neighbor, not a future wife. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. Leaning closer, he lowered his voice. "The truth is, this arrangement works for everybody." Arrangement. Not marriage. Arrangement. Then he added, "The land deal moves forward, the rumors disappear, and everybody wins." I stayed calm, but inside something clicked into place, because he had just connected all three pieces himself: the wedding, the reputation, the land. One deal, one objective, one transaction, and my sister was trapped in the middle of it. The next morning I drove back to Richmond and spent several hours researching public records, property filings, development agreements, corporate records, everything connected to the Holloways. What I found confirmed my suspicions. The family was carrying significant debt. Several business projects had failed, and the development project they were counting on couldn't move forward without acquiring my father's river property. That land wasn't a bonus, it was essential. Without it, the project stalled. With it, millions of dollars became possible. Suddenly, the rush to get Emma married made perfect sense. The final confirmation came 2 days later. I was walking past my father's office when I overheard him speaking with Margaret Holloway. The door wasn't completely closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but one sentence stopped me. "The property transfers after the wedding." I froze. Then Margaret said, "The investors need guarantees." My father replied, "They'll get them." That was all I needed. No assumptions, no theories, no guesses. Proof. The wedding and the land deal were connected, exactly as Emma suspected, exactly as my parents denied. That evening, I sat in my room reviewing everything I'd gathered, the documents, the conversations, the timelines, the evidence. The truth was undeniable. This wasn't a wedding built on love. It was a business arrangement disguised as one. But facts alone weren't enough, because people willing to sacrifice their daughter for appearances weren't going to suddenly change because I handed them paperwork. I needed something stronger, something public, something impossible to ignore. And then I thought about the engagement luncheon, the event my mother had spent weeks planning, the room where both families, church leaders, and half the town would be gathered, a room full of witnesses. And that's when I realized exactly where this story was going to end. Not in private, not behind closed doors, but in front of everyone, where the truth would finally have nowhere left to hide. The engagement luncheon was only a few days away, and for the first time since coming home, I knew exactly what needed to happen. Not revenge, not a fight, not some dramatic confrontation. The truth simply needed to be heard by the right people, in the right room, at the right moment. A few days before the luncheon, I met Emma at a small coffee shop outside town. For nearly an hour, we talked about everything except the wedding: school, friends, her future, the life she wanted. Slowly, she started sounding like herself again. Then I asked her one question. If nobody else had a vote, I said, no parents, no town, no rumors, what would you choose? Her answer came immediately. I'd go back to school. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. What would you do? Nursing school, I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I could actually see her future. And it didn't include Nathan Holloway. The night before the luncheon, I gave my parents one final chance. I placed copies of the documents on the living room table: the land agreement, the development records, the paperwork connecting everything together. Both of them went silent. I looked at my father. How much is Emma worth? My mother looked horrified. My father looked angry. But neither of them answered, because they couldn't. Every answer made them look worse. Finally, my father said, "You don't understand." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I understand perfectly." The conversation ended there, not because I lost, because there was nothing left to argue. The truth was sitting on the table between us. Later that night, Emma knocked on my bedroom door. She looked nervous, but stronger than before. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I wrote something. It was a letter, not to me, to herself. A page full of everything she'd been too afraid to say. How trapped she felt, how invisible she'd become, how everyone seemed to have plans for her life except her. When I finished reading, I handed it back. "You don't have to read this tomorrow." She looked surprised. "I don't?" "No," I said. "You just need to remember what it says." Because the words already belonged to her. That was enough. The morning of the luncheon arrived. The church fellowship hall was packed. White tablecloths, flowers, homemade food, smiling guests. Everything looked perfect, exactly the way my mother wanted it. Church leaders arrived, business owners arrived, family friends arrived. Almost everyone whose opinion mattered in Willow Creek sat somewhere in that room. A room full of witnesses. A room full of people expecting a celebration, not knowing they were about to watch the entire story change. Emma sat at the head table beside Nathan, the engagement ring still on her finger, the folded letter hidden in her hand. My father moved through the room greeting guests. My mother accepted congratulations. Margaret Holloway looked confident. Nathan looked comfortable. Everyone believed the hard part was over. Everyone except me. Because I knew something they didn't. The truth only stays buried until someone decides to say it out loud. And for the first time in her life, my sister was ready to speak. A few minutes later, my father stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The room slowly fell silent. Every face turned toward the head table, waiting for the celebration to begin, waiting for the announcement, waiting for the future bride to smile. What none of them realized was that before the day ended, my sister would finally choose her own future, and everything my parents had spent weeks building would come crashing down in front of the entire town.